The morning sun cast long shadows across the freshly cut grass as Captain James Ramirez stood in front of his new home, keys jingling in his hand. He couldn't help but smile. After 10 years of military service, 3 tough overseas deployments, and countless nights spent poring over real estate listings, he finally had a place to call his own. "Well, this is it," he whispered to himself, taking in the modest 2-story house with its blue shutters and small front porch. Nothing fancy, but to James, it was perfect. The moving truck rumbled down Maple Street, turning carefully into the entrance of Oakwood Estates. The neighborhood was exactly what James had been looking for. Quiet streets lined with well-kept homes, kids riding bikes on the sidewalks, and a sense of order that appealed to his military background. As the movers began unloading his belongings, James noticed an older woman across the street watching intently from behind her curtains. Trying to be neighborly, he waved, but she quickly disappeared from view. "Don't mind Mrs. Wilkins," said a friendly voice. James turned to see a middle-aged man walking over with a coffee mug in hand. "I'm Tom from next door. Welcome to the neighborhood." They shook hands as Tom explained. "Patricia Wilkins is our HOA president. Takes the job a bit too seriously if you ask me, but that's just how she is." James nodded. "I've dealt with all types of commanding officers. I'm sure we'll get along fine." That afternoon, while directing the movers where to place his couch, James noticed the moving truck was partially blocking the sidewalk. He quickly asked them to adjust it, but not before spotting Patricia Wilkins taking photos with her phone from across the street. That evening, after the movers had left, James sat on his porch steps with a well-deserved beer, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. The thick HOA rulebook sat beside him, all 87 pages of it. Being methodical by nature, he'd already gone through it twice, highlighting important sections and making notes. No basketball hoops visible from the street. Trash cans must be brought in by 8 p.m. on collection day. Exterior paint colors must be approved by committee. James murmured to himself, committing the rules to memory. Over the next few days, James threw himself into making the house a home. He unpacked boxes, arranged furniture, and started planning small improvements. On Saturday morning, while trimming hedges, he met the Rodriguez family from across the street, who invited him to a neighborhood barbecue the following weekend. "You'll meet everyone there," Maria Rodriguez said warmly. "Except maybe Patricia. She usually only shows up if she thinks someone's breaking a rule." James laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. At the barbecue, James hit it off with several neighbors. He shared stories about his time in the service, the appropriate ones, played catch with the neighborhood kids, and even helped Tom fix his wobbly grill. People seemed genuinely happy to have a military man in their community. "You planning to stay long?" asked Bill Chen, a retired teacher from down the block. "If all goes well, yes," James replied. "The base is only 20 minutes away, and I'd like to put down some roots." What James didn't know was that Patricia Wilkins was watching the gathering from her dining room window, jotting notes in a small notebook. The moving truck incident had already put James on her watch list. Now, seeing how quickly he was being accepted by the neighbors, she struggled to control only strengthened her resolution. As James walked home that evening, waving goodbye to his new friends, he noticed a white envelope stuck in his doorframe. Inside was a printed notice, "Violation. Lawn exceeds maximum height of 3 inches. Please remedy within 24 hours to avoid fines." James looked at his neatly trimmed lawn in confusion. He had just mowed it yesterday, and it was nowhere near 3 inches. He shrugged it off as a mistake, not knowing this was only the first shot in Patricia Wilkins' campaign against the new resident of 1487 Maple Street. Part 2. The Flag Incident. A neighborhood like Oakwood Estates can be more than just houses on a street. It can be the first real home many service members have ever had, he explained. That's why community matters so much to us. Throughout his presentation, James never once mentioned the conflict with Patricia directly. Instead, he focused on building understanding about why certain things, like flags, yard maintenance, and occasional gatherings with fellow service members, held special meaning for veterans. When he finished, the applause was heartfelt. Several people dabbed at their eyes, moved by his sincere words. Patricia found herself clapping too, a lump forming in her throat as she realized how narrow her perspective had been. After a short break, it was time for the community representatives to speak. Maynard Wilson went first, followed by the president of the Chamber of Commerce. Patricia's turn came third, and as she approached the podium, the room fell silent. She had prepared notes, a careful defense of HOA regulations and property values, but looking out at the faces watching her, particularly James's respectful attention, those points suddenly seemed hollow. Patricia set her notes aside and took a deep breath. "I had a whole speech planned about the importance of neighborhood standards," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "But after what I've heard today, that doesn't seem very important anymore." She paused, gathering her courage. "The truth is, I've been so focused on rules that I forgot about the people those rules were supposed to serve. I owe Captain Ramirez an apology, and probably many others in our neighborhood." The admission hung in the air for a moment before she continued. "What I called unauthorized propaganda represents sacrifice and loss I can't begin to comprehend. I was wrong, deeply wrong." As Patricia returned to her seat, she caught James's eye. He gave her a small nod, not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement of her step toward accountability. The lawn violation notice was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, James found similar notices about his mailbox being non-compliant, though it matched the neighbors, his garbage can being improperly stored, it was behind the fence, and his garden hose being unsightly, it was coiled neatly on a wall-mounted reel. Each time, James politely addressed the issue with an email to the HOA board, attaching photos showing he was following the rules. He never received replies, but the notices temporarily stopped coming. One evening, after a particularly long day at the base, James sat on his porch looking at the empty spot in his front yard. He pictured the flagpole he'd been planning, nothing massive, just tall enough to properly display the American flag and his regiment's colors. The image of those flags waving in the breeze made him smile. The next Saturday, James drove to the hardware store and loaded his truck with supplies. He'd studied the HOA guidelines carefully. Section 7, Paragraph 3 specifically allowed flagpoles not exceeding 20 feet in height with proper installation. He'd even drawn up plans to make sure everything was by the book. His neighbor Tom wandered over as James was marking the spot for installation. "Putting up a flagpole, huh?" Tom asked, sipping from his ever-present coffee mug. "Yep, already checked the HOA rules." "It's all good," James replied, measuring the distance from his property line. Tom chuckled. "Rules don't always matter to Patricia, but good luck, I think it'll look great." It took James most of the day to install the pole properly. He dug the hole deep enough, mixed and poured concrete for a solid foundation, and made sure everything was perfectly level. By sunset, the pole stood tall and straight, waiting for its flags. The next morning, James woke up early. He'd been looking forward to this moment since he bought the house. He carefully unfolded the American flag, checking that there were no wrinkles or imperfections. Next came his regiment's flag, dark blue with gold emblems that represented the unit's history and accomplishments. Each crease, each color, carried memories of the men and women he'd served with. With reverence, he attached both flags to the line and slowly raised them up the pole. The morning breeze caught them immediately, unfurling them against the brightening sky. James stood back and saluted, feeling a lump in his throat. This small piece of his front yard now felt like home. He was still admiring the sight when he had to get ready for work. Mondays meant wearing his full uniform, and James took pride in making sure every button and badge was perfectly positioned. He was adjusting his collar when a pounding on his front door made him jump. The knocking continued, growing more insistent by the second. James opened the door to find Patricia Wilkins standing there, her face flushed with anger, arms crossed tightly over her floral blouse. "That," she said, jabbing a finger toward the flagpole without so much as a hello, "is a violation. It needs to come down today, or you'll be fined $100 per day." James blinked, momentarily confused. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilkins. There must be some misunderstanding. I checked the guidelines thoroughly before installing it. Section 7, Paragraph 3 permits flagpoles under 20 feet. Mine is only 15 feet. "I don't care what you think you read," Patricia snapped. "That second flag is unauthorized. Only the American flag is permitted." James maintained his composure, though he could feel his heart rate increasing. "Actually, the rules don't specify which flags can be displayed, only the height of the pole and installation requirements. Would you like me to show you the relevant section? I have the handbook right here. He reached for the binder he kept on his entryway table, but Patricia's face only grew redder. I don't need to see anything, she declared, her voice rising. I've been president of this board for 8 years. I know the rules better than anyone, and I'm telling you that pole is unauthorized as installed. A car slowed down as it passed the house, the driver watching the confrontation with interest. Look, Patricia continued, lowering her voice slightly when she noticed they had an audience. I'm trying to be reasonable here. You have until the end of the day to remove that second flag. If the whole pole is gone by Friday, I won't issue the first fine. Before James could respond, she turned and marched back down his walkway, phone already in hand, apparently texting someone about her latest enforcement action. James stood at his mailbox the following afternoon, staring at yet another violation notice. This one claimed his newly planted rose bushes were non-approved vegetation. He sighed, tucking the paper into his pocket. That made 6 notices in the past 10 days. Another love letter from Patricia. Tom called from across the street, where he was washing his car. James nodded, walking over to his neighbor. Apparently my roses are criminal now. Let me guess, she didn't mention that half the neighborhood has the same roses. Tom shook his head, wringing out his sponge. She's really got it in for you, man. I'm not taking down that flagpole, James said firmly. My unit lost good people overseas. That flag means something. Back inside, James added the latest notice to a growing file folder labeled HOA Communications. Inside was a meticulous record, dated photos of his property, copies of the rulebook with relevant sections highlighted, and a log of every interaction with Patricia. His military training had taught him the value of documentation. The next morning, James was mowing his lawn for the 3rd time that week when Lisa from 3 doors down stopped while walking her dog. I'm sorry about all this, she said, gesturing vaguely toward James' house. Patricia's always been strict, but this is something else. Has she always been this way? James asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. Lisa lowered her voice. She targets people she doesn't like. When the Mendez family moved in last year, she cited them for cooking odors because they had family over for a traditional Sunday dinner. Cooking odors? James couldn't believe it. That's not even in the rulebook. Oh, she makes things up, Lisa confirmed. The board rarely challenges her because nobody wants to become her next target. She hesitated, then added, some of us have been talking. We're tired of it. Over the next few days, more neighbors approached James with their own Patricia stories. The Chens had been cited for wind chimes. The elderly Mr. Johnson got in trouble for leaving his garbage can out the day after his hip surgery. Each story made James' blood boil more. On Friday evening, James received a text from a buddy at the base. Still oak for the cookout tomorrow? The guys are looking forward to it. James had almost forgotten he'd invited some fellow officers over. Nothing fancy, just hamburgers, cold drinks, and catching up. He quickly confirmed and spent Saturday morning preparing his backyard. He set up a folding table with a checkered tablecloth, cleaned his grill, and made sure there was plenty of seating. Around 2 p.m., his friends began arriving. Lieutenant Dan Kelly brought his famous potato salad. Captain Patel came with his wife and their homemade cookies. In total, 8 people gathered in James' backyard, their laughter and conversation at a perfectly reasonable volume. This place is great, Ramirez, Lieutenant Kelly said, admiring the yard. Beats living on base by a mile. Thanks, James replied, flipping burgers, just dealing with some HOA drama. Worse than the drill sergeant from basic, Captain Patel joked. At least he followed his own rules, James laughed. They were enjoying their meal when James noticed Patricia peering over the fence from her side yard. When she saw him looking, she quickly ducked away. 10 minutes later, he spotted her taking photos from behind a tree in another neighbor's yard. We've got surveillance, he muttered to his friends, who found it more amusing than concerning. Want us to do some PT in your front yard? Lieutenant Kelly offered with a grin. Show her what a real disturbance looks like. James shook his head, smiling. Let's not give her ammunition. By 7:30 p.m., the gathering was winding down. They had cleaned up most of the food, and a couple of friends had already left when James heard sirens approaching. A police cruiser pulled up in front of his house, lights flashing. Two officers stepped out, looking uncomfortable. "Is there a problem, officers?" James asked, walking to meet them in the driveway. "We received a complaint about a wild party with possible illegal activity," one officer explained, eyeing James' small group of clearly professional friends. "Called in by air." He checked his notepad. "Mrs. Patricia Wilkins." James could hardly believe it. "This is the wild party," he said, gesturing to his remaining friends, most still in polo shirts and khakis. "We're all military officers having a cookout." The tall officer nodded, clearly embarrassed. "Sir, we can see there's no issue here. Sorry to bother you." As they turned to leave, James noticed several neighbors had come outside, curious about the police presence. They were watching the scene unfold, their expressions ranging from surprise to knowing disappointment. Patricia had gone too far, and now everyone could see it. The police officers hadn't even pulled away from the curb when Patricia burst out of her house like a tornado. Her face was flushed deep red, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon as she marched across the street toward James's property. "Don't leave yet," the shorter police officer muttered to his partner, nodding toward the approaching woman. "This might not be over." James stepped forward to meet Patricia at the edge of his driveway, aware that his military friends and several neighbors were now watching intently. Captain Patel quietly moved closer, positioning himself where he could step in if needed. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Patricia's voice was shrill as she jabbed a finger toward James. "Getting your military buddies to intimidate me won't work. I've already documented everything." James kept his voice calm and even. "Mrs. Wilkins, nobody is intimidating anyone. This was a small, quiet gathering that broke no HOA rules or city ordinances, as the officers just confirmed." "You don't know the first thing about living in a civilized neighborhood," she snapped, her phone now recording the exchange. "Military people are all the same. You think the rules don't apply to you." A few gasps came from the gathering crowd of neighbors. Tom stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Patricia, that's enough. James hasn't done anything wrong." She whirled toward Tom. "Stay out of this. You're probably next on the violation list for that dead patch in your lawn." James noticed Lisa from down the street had her own phone out now, recording the scene. Several other neighbors were doing the same, capturing Patricia's behavior for posterity. "Mrs. Wilkins," James tried again, "I understand you have concerns about my property. I'm happy to discuss them at the next HOA meeting, but right now I'm asking you to please leave my property." "Oh, I'm not on your precious property," she countered, making a show of staying exactly on the public sidewalk. "And I'm not leaving until that flagpole comes down. It's an eyesore and a violation." The taller police officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" Patricia turned to him, suddenly switching to a sugary voice. "Officer, I'm just trying to enforce our neighborhood covenants. This man," she pointed at James again, "is deliberately violating our HOA rules with an unauthorized flagpole and disruptive gatherings." The officer glanced at James in his casual clothes, then at his clearly professional friends, and finally at the perfectly normal flagpole with the American flag and regiment flag gently waving in the evening breeze. "Ma'am, I don't see any violations of city ordinances here. HOA disputes are civil matters." "This isn't just an HOA matter." Patricia's voice rose again. "He's devaluing our properties with his military propaganda." The crowd grew completely silent. Even Patricia seemed to realize she'd crossed a line. The shorter officer stepped forward now. "Ma'am, are you referring to the American flag as propaganda?" "Not that one," Patricia backpedaled, pointing to the regiment flag. "That one. It doesn't belong here." James felt a surge of anger, but kept his composure. That flag represented friends he'd lost, battles they'd fought together. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Mrs. Wilkins, that's my regiment's flag. Men and women I served with died under that flag. I have every right to display it, both by HOA guidelines and, more importantly, by the freedoms those people died protecting." Patricia wasn't backing down. "I don't care if you've been to Iraq or Mars, your kind doesn't belong in Oakwood Estates. That flag comes down, or what?" It was Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street who spoke up now, stepping forward from the crowd. "Or you'll keep harassing a man who served our country." a man who follows every rule while you make up new ones whenever it suits you. Other voices joined in, years of frustration with Patricia's selective enforcement suddenly finding an outlet. You cited my mother for her wheelchair ramp. You fined the Wongs for having a birthday party for their 5-year-old. You tried to ban Mr. Johnson's home healthcare worker from parking on the street. Patricia's eyes darted around as she realized she was now surrounded by angry neighbors. The police officers watched carefully, ready to intervene if needed, but the confrontation remained verbal. "This isn't over," Patricia finally sputtered, backing away from the crowd. "I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. We'll see who has the final say." As she retreated toward her house, one of James's military friends whispered, "Man, I've faced enemy fire that was less intense than that woman." James couldn't help but smile, even as he worried about what Patricia might do next. The battle lines had been drawn, and despite his desire to live peacefully, he knew this fight was just beginning. James woke up early Sunday morning to his phone buzzing nonstop. Bleary-eyed, he scrolled through dozens of text messages and missed calls from friends, fellow soldiers, and even a few numbers he didn't recognize. "Check Facebook," read one message from Captain Patel. "It's everywhere." Confused, James opened the app to find his notifications exploding. People were tagging him in a video of yesterday's confrontation with Patricia. Lisa from down the street had posted it late last night, and in less than 12 hours, it had already been shared over 10,000 times. "HOA President attacks Army Captain over American flag," read the caption. James watched the video with growing discomfort. Lisa had captured everything: Patricia's angry approach, her comments about military people, and her claim that his regiment's flag was propaganda. The video clearly showed James remaining calm and respectful while Patricia grew increasingly hostile. What made the video even more powerful were the comments from his neighbors, standing up one by one to share how Patricia had targeted them over the years. The contrast between her behavior and the community's support for James couldn't have been clearer. By the time James stepped outside to get his newspaper, 3 more neighbors had texted him the link. Tom waved from his driveway. "You're famous, buddy," Tom called out. "My cousin in Ohio just shared that video." James shook his head, unsure how to feel about his private dispute becoming public spectacle. "I didn't want all this attention," he said as Tom walked over. "I just wanted to fly my flags in peace." "Well, someone needed to stand up to her," Tom replied. "Might as well be someone who's faced worse than an angry HOA president." Throughout the day, the video continued to spread. A local veterans group shared it with a comment, "This is how Oakwood Estates treats those who served." By afternoon, a local news station had picked it up for their evening broadcast. Captain James Ramirez declined to comment, the reporter said, standing in front of James's house, "But neighbors tell us this conflict has been brewing since the decorated Army officer moved in 3 months ago." The report included clips from the viral video and interviews with several neighbors who didn't hold back their opinions about Patricia's leadership style. "She's been making up rules for years," Mrs. Rodriguez told the camera. "We're all tired of walking on eggshells in our own neighborhood." By Monday morning, national veterans organizations had gotten involved. The American Legion posted a statement of support for James, and #IStandWithCaptain Ramirez was trending on social media. Someone had created a mock-up of his regiment's flag with the caption, "This is not propaganda. This is sacrifice." James tried to maintain his normal routine despite the chaos. He went to work at the base, where fellow officers patted him on the back and joked about his newfound fame. "Sir, my mom called to say she saw you on the morning news," one young lieutenant told him. "She said you represented the Army well." Colonel Hayes, James's commanding officer, called him into his office midday. "Quite a situation you've got there, Ramirez," the colonel said, gesturing for James to sit down. "How are you handling it?" "Trying to keep a low profile, sir," James replied honestly. "I never wanted to cause trouble." The colonel nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes trouble finds us anyway. Just remember you're representing all of us now. Keep your cool like you did in that video." When James returned home that evening, he found a small group of veterans had organized an impromptu gathering on the sidewalk near his house. They were respectful, not blocking traffic or making excessive noise, but their message was clear: They stood with their fellow servicemen. One elderly man with a Vietnam veteran cap approached James as he parked his car. "We've got your back, son," he said, shaking James's hand firmly. "No one talks about our flags like that." James thanked them sincerely but asked them to disperse before dark, not wanting to give Patricia more ammunition. They understood and left peacefully, many stopping to salute his flags before departing. As James was preparing dinner, he noticed Patricia's house across the street was unusually dark. Her car was in the driveway, but no lights were on inside. The neighborhood rumor mill suggested she hadn't left her house since Sunday morning, when the video first started making the rounds. His phone rang again. A local newspaper reporter wanting a comment. James politely declined, as he had with all media requests. This wasn't about publicity for him, it was about principle. Just as he was about to turn in for the night, an email notification appeared on his phone. The sender was unexpected. Brigadier General Phillips from the Regional Command. The subject line made James's heart skip. Meeting request Ray. Community Relations Incident. The email from Brigadier General Phillips kept James awake most of the night. It was brief and professional, simply requesting that he come to the general's office the following afternoon to discuss the recent community incident. James had served under General Phillips during his second deployment, a tough but fair leader who didn't waste time on trivial matters. "What have I gotten myself into?" James muttered as he prepared for work the next morning. He'd never intended to create a situation that would reach command level. At the base, James noticed people looking at him differently. Some nodded respectfully, others gave him thumbs-up gestures. A few senior officers who normally wouldn't acknowledge a captain in passing stopped to chat briefly. The video had clearly made the rounds through military circles. At 1400 hours sharp, James knocked on the general's door, his uniform perfectly pressed. "Enter," came the firm response. General Phillips stood as James entered, offering a firm handshake. Colonel Hayes was already seated in the office, along with Major Williams from Public Affairs. "At ease, Captain," the general said, gesturing to an empty chair. "I assume you know why you're here." "Yes, sir. The incident with my HOA president has gotten out of hand." The general leaned back in his chair. "That's putting it mildly. That video has over 1 million views now. The Secretary of the Army's office called this morning." James felt his stomach drop. "Sir, I never intended." "Relax, Ramirez," General Phillips interrupted. "You're not in trouble. In fact, your composure during that confrontation was exemplary. You represented the uniform well." Colonel Hayes nodded in agreement. "The way you handled yourself is exactly what we train our officers to do: remain calm under pressure, de-escalate when possible." James relaxed slightly but remained alert. There had to be more to this meeting than a pat on the back. "That said," the general continued, "we now have a situation that's grown beyond a simple neighborhood dispute. It's become a matter of military-civilian relations in our community." Major Williams opened a folder. The story's been picked up by national outlets. Veterans groups from across the country are reaching out, offering support. Some are threatening to stage protests at your HOA. "I never asked for any of that," James said quickly. "We know," the general assured him. "But perception matters, especially in situations like this. Which brings me to why you're here." The general slid a document across the desk. It was official letterhead from the base commander's office. "We're hosting a community relations event this Friday," General Phillips explained. "The mayor, city council members, and representatives from various community organizations will attend. We'd like the president of your HOA to be there as well." James's eyes widened. "Mrs. Wilkins?" "Sir, with all due respect, I don't think she'll come." "She will," Colonel Hayes said confidently, "because the invitation isn't coming from you. It's coming from the base commander, with copies to the mayor and local press." Major Williams added, "We're framing it as an opportunity to build understanding between military personnel and civilian communities. The focus is positive, not on the dispute itself." James reviewed the invitation letter. It was perfectly crafted, professional, non-confrontational, but with an unmistakable subtext that declining would be noticed by everyone from the mayor to the media. "What exactly do you want me to do at this event, sir?" James asked. "Just be yourself," the general replied. Give a short presentation about military families transitioning to civilian neighborhoods. Talk about what service means to you and why those flags are important. Nothing confrontational, educational. And Mrs. Wilkins. She'll have her opportunity to speak as well, the general said with the faintest hint of a smile, in front of everyone. 2 days later, Patricia Wilkins sat at her dining room table staring at the official invitation. She'd been ignoring calls and emails since the video went viral, venturing out only to get her mail. Even her fellow HOA board members had distanced themselves, with 2 resigning via email. She'd considered ignoring this invitation too, until she noticed the list: the mayor, 2 city council members, the Chamber of Commerce president, and the editor of the local newspaper. The Regional HOA Oversight Committee was also copied, the organization that could potentially review and revoke her authority. With shaking hands, Patricia picked up her phone and dialed the number on the letterhead. "This is Patricia Wilkins," she said when the base operator answered. "I'm calling about the community relations event. I'll be attending." As she hung up, Patricia glanced out her window at James's house across the street. The flags were still there, waving gently in the breeze. She felt trapped. Going to the base would be humiliating, but not going might be worse. Either way, she was about to face the consequences of her actions in a very public forum. Friday morning arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for the community relations event at the Army base. James stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his dress uniform with practiced precision. Each medal, each ribbon told a story of service and sacrifice. Today, those stories might help bridge a divide. Across the street, Patricia was also preparing, though with far less confidence. She'd changed outfits 3 times already, torn between looking professional and not wanting to appear too formal or too casual. She finally settled on a navy blue pantsuit, serious but not intimidating. For the first time in her 8 years as HOA president, Patricia felt genuinely nervous about representing the neighborhood. The base was only 20 minutes away, but James left early, needing time to review his presentation and calm his nerves. He'd spent hours crafting a 10-minute talk about military families and their transition to civilian life, focusing on what neighborhoods like Oakwood Estates meant to those who had spent years moving from base to base. When Patricia arrived at the main gate, a young soldier checked her ID and handed her a visitor's badge. "They're expecting you in the community center, ma'am," he said politely. "Just follow the signs." As Patricia walked through the base, she was struck by how orderly everything was: the neatly maintained buildings, the precisely trimmed grass, the clear signage. It reminded her of what she'd always wanted for Oakwood Estates, though her methods had clearly gone too far. The community center was already buzzing with activity when she entered. Mayor Wilson was chatting with Colonel Hayes near the refreshment table. 2 city council members were examining a display about military family support programs. A table with name tags and information packets was staffed by a friendly-looking woman in uniform. "Mrs. Wilkins, I'm Lieutenant Cooper. We're so glad you could join us today." The woman's greeting was warm and genuine, making Patricia feel even more uncomfortable about why she was really there. "The meeting will begin in 15 minutes, Lieutenant Cooper continued, handing Patricia a folder. "Here's the agenda and some information about our community outreach programs." Patricia took a seat in the back row, hoping to remain inconspicuous. No such luck. Colonel Hayes spotted her and approached immediately. "Mrs. Wilkins, thank you for coming. General Phillips is looking forward to meeting you." His tone was professional and gave no hint of judgment, but Patricia still felt exposed. The meeting began precisely on time, with General Phillips welcoming everyone and explaining the purpose of the gathering. "The relationship between our military community and our civilian neighbors is essential to us all," he said. "Today is about understanding each other better and finding common ground." The first half hour included presentations from the mayor about city services for veterans and from a counselor about the challenges military families face when transitioning to civilian life. Patricia listened more attentively than she'd expected to, learning things she'd never considered about the struggles of frequent relocations and reintegration after deployment. Then it was James's turn to speak. He approached the podium in his crisp uniform, his bearing confident but not arrogant. Patricia found herself sitting up straighter, oddly compelled by his presence. Good morning, James began. I'm Captain James Ramirez. Before I talk about military families in civilian communities, I'd like to tell you about this flag. He gestured to a display showing his regiment's flag alongside the American flag. This isn't just a piece of fabric with some symbols. For those of us who served under it, it represents the people we fought alongside, some who never made it home. His voice remained steady, but the emotion behind his words was clear. When we display it at our homes, we're honoring those connections and sacrifices. James continued, explaining how military families often searched for a sense of belonging after years of moving from base to base.